You can't read history without seeing the influence of the Bible. Let me take you to this founding father, Ben Franklin. Now, we have about 250 founding fathers, and Franklin is certainly one of the 5 least religious founding fathers. But Ben Franklin is the first guy in our history to call for the United States of America. Back in 1754, he came up with what was called the Albany Plan of Union that says, hey, let's not be 13 colonies, let's be the United States. Now, it didn't get done at that point in time, but that was his lifelong objective and goal. And so 22 years later, he's one of the 56 guys who signs the Declaration of Independence. That's the first step toward us becoming the United States of America. He's liking this. 7 years later, he's one of only 3 guys to sign the peace treaty to end the American Revolution and make us an independent nation. Now we're getting really close to having this United States of America. And then 4 years later, he's sitting at the Constitutional Convention making it happen. He's there to help create the United States of America. Now, Franklin is right here. And you see Franklin, he's 81 years old, and he's the old man of the convention by far. Now, I know that's not impressive today, 81, because the average lifespan in America is 80 today. So we know people live in their 80s and 90s and up to 100. Yeah, but back then, do you know what the average lifespan was when they signed the Constitution of the United States? It was 33 years old was the average lifespan, which means if you happen to be a senior in high school and you're in here this morning and you'd been alive back then, you would have already had your midlife crisis. I mean, once you hit 18, it's way over. You're way past halfway when you hit 18. 81 years old. Franklin's loving this, helping create he's wanted the United States of America for 33 years. At least he was initially loving it. He wasn't loving it 5 weeks into it. You see, all the states came with their own agenda. They came to create the United States, but you had the Virginia plan, you had the Connecticut plan, you had the New York plan, you had the New Jersey plan. Of course, the guys from New Jersey loved the New Jersey plan, but they didn't want the New York plan. New York guys didn't want the Virginia plan. The Virginia guys didn't want the Connecticut plan. And so everybody came with their own agenda. And so 5 weeks into this stuff, into the convention, there's so much bickering and fighting going on that delegates are now starting to leave. Alexander Hamilton, New York, he's out of here. He's tired of all the fighting and bickering. He's got better stuff to do. George Mason, Virginia, he's gone because he's just tired of the fighting. At that point, Franklin rises to give the longest speech he gave at the convention. It was on Thursday, June the 28th, 1787. I want you to see what Ben Franklin told the other delegates as he's watching this thing fall apart before his eyes. He said, "Gentlemen, in this situation of this assembly, groping, as it were, in the dark to find political truth and scarce able to distinguish it when presented to us, how has it happened, sir, that we have not hitherto once thought of humbly applying to the Father of lights to illuminate our understanding?" He said, "In the beginning of the contest with Great Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayer in this room for divine protection." A little time out here. This is the identical room in which 11 years earlier they had signed the Declaration of Independence. Back then we had the Continental Congress, and it was one Congress. We didn't have a House and Senate. We had one Congress, and they had 2 chaplains, and they did a ton of praying. Franklin says, "Guys, don't you remember what we used to do in this room? We prayed all the time." He said, "And our prayers, sir, were heard, and they were graciously answered." He said, "All of us engaged in this struggle must have observed frequent instances of a superintending providence in our favor." He said, "And have we now forgotten this powerful friend? Do we imagine we no longer need his assistance?" He said, "I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men." He said, "If a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We've been assured in the sacred writings that except the Lord build a house, they labor in vain that build it." He said, "I firmly believe this. And I also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel, and we shall become a reproach and a byword down to future ages. I therefore beg leave to move that henceforth prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessings on our deliberations be held in this assembly every morning before we proceed to business." May I point out, that's not bad for your least religious founding father. He has just chewed the other guys out for not praying enough. And that's your least religious founding father. But here's what I want you to see. Franklin, in this little speech you just saw, that speech is 14 sentences long. Here's the question I've got for you. How many Bible verses did you just see Ben Franklin quote in that speech? The answer is 14 Bible verses. You should have seen these verses right here, because these are the verses Franklin just quoted. And yet today, if Christians recognize these, we praise them. "I can't believe you saw those verses. I didn't see those verses." See, Today, Christians don't see that, but back in his day, he's the least religious founding father, and he's quoting the Bible like that. See, this is the deal where today to know the Bible is praiseworthy. Back then, even the least religious knew the Bible better than we know the Bible today. See, that's a cultural shift we have. And by the way, the rest of the story is after Franklin's call, they agreed to take 3 days off, kind of like a cooling off period here. Let's back away for a little while. And George Washington in his diary said that in those 3 days they attended church and listened to patriotic orations. So they're at church for these days, and while they're there, the Reverend William Rogers has a special prayer over the Constitutional Convention. Now, I actually own the prayer that he prayed. We're very blessed in our organization. We own 100,000 documents from before 1812. So I own thousands of documents from George Washington, Adams, Jefferson, these thousands of documents out of black history and out of church history and out of judicial history and out of educational. Got all these documents, and we have the prayer that he prayed over the Constitutional Convention. And it was not a dinky little civic prayer like God bless this gathering. I mean, he had the Constitutional Convention there in front of him, and he took time and he prayed a prayer over that. Everybody in the city knew it was falling apart. They knew all the trouble going on. He prayed a prayer. And that prayer was actually printed on the front page of the newspaper because everybody in the city knew the trouble was there. And when you read that prayer, it's not up in a little corner. It takes 3/4 of the front page of the newspaper, the prayer he prayed over the Constitutional Convention. They get back from that time of prayer, and delegates like Jonathan Dayton said the whole atmosphere had changed. That was a really dumb idea last week, but that's a pretty reasonable idea. They started changing and cooperating and started thinking through things. And so they go from 5 weeks of fighting, bickering, literally falling apart at the convention, to only 10 weeks later to come out with the document under which we now govern ourselves. We're the longest ongoing constitutional republic in the history of the world. And if you know the Bible, and if you read the Constitution, you find Bible verses and Bible precepts all over that document. And yet today we're regularly told, oh no, the Constitution is a godless document. As a matter of fact, there's a book out by 2 professors from Cornell University, Cramnick and Moore, and the name of the book is A Godless Constitution. When somebody today tells me the Constitution is godless, what they have actually told me is that they are biblically illiterate. They wouldn't recognize a Bible verse if it bit them in the ankle, because there's Bible verses all over there, and they just don't recognize it. See, this is the heritage we have, and it was such an obvious heritage that even if you take a president like Andrew Jackson, who's one of our least religious presidents, even for Andrew Jackson, it was a no-brainer. Andrew Jackson says the Bible is the rock on which our republic rests. Everybody knew that and agreed. Not today. Man, everybody said, oh no, Bible had nothing to do with secular beginnings. But when you look back to the founding,